On my latest rewatch of The Sopranos, I realized that the show could be described as a competition for who could be the biggest piece of crap. Every character, even the seemingly good characters, have moments that make you think, wait, is this guy supposed to be evil? So, like any sane normal human being, I decided to compile a list of the most evil thing that every character in The Sopranos has ever done. But I quickly realized that that video would be way too long, so I cut it down to just the core cast. But if this video does okay, I might as well upload the full fat version. As always, I look forward to arguing with you cowards in the comments about what I got wrong, about who secretly isn't that evil, who I misunderstood, and that I'm just generally an idiot. So leave a like, sit back and relax and enjoy the most evil thing that every one of these gabagool eating degenerates has done. I don't think it's a controversial opinion, but Olivia Soprano isn't exactly winning any Mother of the Year awards.
I could stick this fork in your eye!
It takes a very special kind of evil, not only to permit your son's assassination, but to orchestrate it. But she does exactly this when she tells Junior, who believes that he's currently the boss of the New Jersey mob, that Tony has been using her nursing home to have secret meetings with all of the New Jersey captains. Having known Junior for several decades, she already knows that he's a human pressure cooker who tends to lash out at any perceived disrespect. So of course he's going to try and take Tony out of the picture, because if he doesn't, he'd have to admit to himself that his nephew that he used to play catch with is not only the acting boss, but manipulated him into thinking that he was the boss, assuming all the risk while being little more than a glorified figurehead. And anyone who knows Junior knows that his ego would never allow that to slide.
She doesn't realize what she says half the time.
Let's put our cards on the table here. I heard your radio debut on those tapes the feds made at Green Grove. So she doesn't know what she's saying half the time. Well, which half did you listen to? The half that doesn't make any sense, or the half that we both know played you like a f***ing child?
The funniest part to me is that she masterminds all of this as retaliation for Tony sending her to a nursing home. Retirement community, after she runs over her friend and sets her house on fire. He just tried to be a good son, and his punishment for that is basically a death sentence. Ironically, for this attempted filicide, and just generally being a horrible mother, I'm pretty certain she's in the extra crispy section of hell. But given her black belt in mental manipulation, she's probably picking at the devil's self-esteem by complaining about it being too drafty and that the pitchforks aren't sharp enough.
And kill me now. Go on, go into the ham. And take the carving knife and stab me. Here, now, please.
Oh, will you shut up? You've been talking for a solid year. You know, hell used to be a nice place before you got here.
Since we covered Mama Soprano, we might as well cover her partner in crime. While given the order for the assassination of your late brother's only son is definitely considered by most to be a dick move, it isn't, in my opinion, the worst thing that Junior's ever done. That award goes to him ordering Donnie's execution simply for repeating a rumor he heard.
I hear Tony has his own mother wants him popped.
Who the fuck told you that?
I don't know, it's just a joke, right?
You think that's funny, a guy's own mother?
Okay.
And sure, no one likes a gossip, especially when it comes to sensitive topics, but the punishment seems a little disproportionate to the crime. A stern warning, or at the very most a baseball bat to the kneecaps, would have sufficed for getting Junior's point across. But clearly he's a man who doesn't believe in half measures.
Sorry!
This isn't the only time we see him overreact, as he does the exact same thing to Freddie Capuano, the owner of Olivia's nursing home.
He's been going around telling Soprano business to anybody who'll listen. He's the one that's been saying that shit about you trying to whack your mother. Even implied that me and her. Pooh, that hairpiece motherfucker.
While we never see the execution, the police officer finding that hairpiece tells us all we need to know. Honorable mention for the time that he killed Christopher's father, Dickie Moltisanti, for laughing at him. Looking back at it, Junior kills a lot of people for no good reason. He's basically a worse version of the right to jail meme. Next up, Tony with indoor plumbing, the freeloading Janice Soprano. While she consistently has horrible taste in men, most notably Ralphie the horse cooker Cifaretto, without a doubt her most toxic relationship has to be hers with Richie. Even Tony, who's not exactly the poster boy for healthy relationships and conflict resolution, points this out.
And we got history together. Yeah, Israel and Palestine.
Yet, contrary to the advice of anyone with half a brain, they decide to rekindle their high school romance.
I thought a lot about her. 10 years, you thought about Janice? There are men in the camp better looking at my sister.
And for a time, it seemed like they might just be able to make it work.
Richie, because of his life experience in prison, he has a sensitivity to the plight of women.
But one night, when complaining about his fox-trotting son, little Ricky...
Richard. How many times I gotta tell you, it was little Ricky when he was 12 years old.
Sorry, when complaining about his fox-trotting son, Richard, he calls him a disgrace and not so subtly implies that he's gay. When Janice attempts to defend him, she ends up getting a knuckle sandwich for her troubles.
And what if he was gay? What difference does it make? Oh.
At first, she's too stunned to speak, which is a first for Janice. But Richie, the malignant that he is, isn't satisfied with simply cheap-shotting his fiancée.
Who are you looking at? You gonna cry now?
If you look closely, you can see the exact moment where she decides to kill him. She disappears and reappears with a gun.
I'm in no mood for you.
And decides to take her revenge. Now, this might be a bit of a hot take, but I think domestic violence is bad. That being said, repeatedly shooting someone for cold cocking you in the mouth seems a smidge excessive, especially when you consider that she had several options, such as telling Tony, that would have ensured that this never happened again. But Richie was kind of asking for it. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Honorable mention for her abandoning her son, resulting in him becoming homeless.
I wonder what's French Canadian for I grew up without a mother. Sacre bleu, where is me mama?
Richie Aprile is easily one of the most hated characters in The Sopranos, and this is for good reason, because outside of just generally having a punchable face, he commits some of the most heinous acts that we see on the show. And in my opinion, the worst of these is his treatment of his old friend Beansy. At the start of season 2, Richie Aprile, fresh off of a 10-year prison sentence, decides to pay his friend Beansy a visit. But rather than reminiscing about the old times, Richie decides to complain about not getting a single visit during the 10 years he was incarcerated, and uses this as an excuse to try and shake down Beansy for money. But Beansy's close friends with Tony and refuses to be intimidated. After cracking a jug of what I hope wasn't scalding hot coffee across his face, Richie decides to go all WWE on him and hits him with the steel chair. And as if that wasn't enough, when Beansy goes running to Tony for protection, causing Tony to point out Richie's hypocrisy and tell him to stop trying to intimidate Beansy, Richie decides to teach him a lesson that he'll never forget by running him over. I've heard of snitches getting stitches, but Richie clearly operates under the rats get broken backs rule. Richie, the absolute psychopath that he is, doesn't seem to care that he's crippled a one-time close friend.
Thought I told you to back the fuck off Beansy.
I did. Then I put it in drive.
Oh, you think this is funny? That guy might never walk again.
Thanks. Thanks, Tony. I might not be able to wipe my own ass, you know that?
Well, your nose is as far as I'm willing to go.
No.
Even when Tony orders him to build Beansy a ramp in order to make his house wheelchair accessible, he refuses.
Richie.
Hey, you're gonna build Beansy a ramp. I'll build a ramp up to your ass. Drive a Lionel up in there.
Only after realizing that going to war with Tony will be a lot more expensive and time-consuming than building a ramp, he decides to visit Beansy in the hospital and offer to build the ramp.
I don't want jack shit from you.
Okay, I'll leave. But if you go crying to Tony Soprano one more time, if you open your mouth, I'm gonna send your arms where your legs are.
He just can't help himself. Even when doing the ostensibly right thing, he has to bully and intimidate. That's what makes it so perfect, that need to physically dominate and belittle others is exactly what causes his death. Honorable mention for his hypocrisy in threatening to kill Christopher for beating up Adriana without first marrying her.
Out of respect for our friend here, I'm gonna talk nice. I ever hear you raise your hands to my niece again, next time you won't see my face. You understand?
He even specifies that once she has a ring on her finger, he's free to use her as a human punching bag again.
Look, kid, I shouldn't have to explain myself. I'm from the old school. You want to raise your hands, you give her your last name. Then it's none of my business. Until then, Keep your hands in your pockets.
I don't know which is worse, the exemption for marital violence or not following the rules that you were so eager to enforce.
Hey, come on, Richie. Get your hand off of me. I'll put one in your head.
Don't f***ing threaten me, Richie.
Don't threaten you. I got a hot arm for you already. Give me a reason.
But then again, what can you expect from a guy who holds a gun to his fiance's head during sex? Dr. Melfi is one of the more morally upstanding characters on the show, but even she's not perfect, as the most evil thing she does in the show is repeatedly enable and even help with Tony's criminal empire. While I understand that as a psychiatrist, Melfi has a duty to care for Tony to the best of her ability, even if she doesn't agree with all of his actions, simply keeping him on as a patient puts her in jeopardy, therefore puts the rest of her patients in jeopardy. And a good example of this was at the end of season 1, where she was forced to go into hiding when Uncle Junior feared that Tony might be blabbing too much during his therapy sessions. By the time the issue was resolved, 2 of her patients had taken their own lives.
How many more people have to die for your personal growth?
But rather than learning from this lesson, she decides to take Tony back as a patient with open arms. In my opinion, this is practically professional misconduct. It's putting Tony's mental health above that of all of her other patients. On top of that, she's fully aware that Tony is using lessons from her therapy sessions in order to become a more effective mafia boss. She even gives him a recommended reading list for being a more effective criminal.
Been reading that book you told me about. The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
If you ask me, she's basically an accessory to all of his crimes. Had she simply allowed him to keep passing out randomly, like a fainting goat, countless people would still be alive. Sure, she eventually saw the light and refused to treat him once she realized that he was irredeemable, but this was several years too late.
As a doctor, I think what you're doing is immoral.
While Silvio is generally the most level-headed member of the crew, with a few notable exceptions, he is usually the voice of reason and seems like he'd be the least likely to beat you to death over a minor misunderstanding. So you'd be forgiven for thinking that despite his criminal underworld ties, he's actually quite a decent guy. But that's only if you don't consider what he does for a living. He's basically a glorified pimp. His day job is to convince vulnerable young women not only to sell their body, but then to give him most of the money. The Bing is a brothel, and he is a human trafficker. It's one of those things that the show rarely comments on directly. Most of the time, it's just small comments of Silvio complaining about having to manage so many women and their emotional needs. But you get a true glimpse into the evil that Silvio regularly has to carry out as part of his job. When Tracy spends 2 weeks off work partying with Ralphie.
Listen to me, you little bukkak. Till you pay what you owe, that shaved twat of yours belongs to me.
That's what makes his character so realistic and scary in a way. He doesn't come across as evil, but he very obviously is based upon his actions. Regardless of how funny or charismatic he might appear, there's no such thing as ethical pimping. Honorable mention for all the executions he carries out over the series, including Jimmy Altieri, Big Puss, and worst of all, Adriana. Boy, that scene was hard to watch. And while he wasn't the one that ordered the death sentence, he is the one that pulled the trigger, so he definitely gets some of the blame. Ralph is a piece of crap. I don't think anyone who's watched The Sopranos would contest it. But for a long time, he managed to balance the fact that he was human fecal matter by being a great earner and being generally hilarious.
I'm upset, but please, I know how to keep my mouth shut.
Unless, of course, there's a slimy sandwich around.
Despite being a degenerate in every sense of the word, Ralph was one of my favorite characters. At least he was until he decided to beat Tracy, the barely legal teen that he knocked up, to death. Yeah. That is one of the roughest scenes to rewatch. After that, I just couldn't look at Ralphie the same way. And neither could Tony. And mind you, he didn't even like Ralphie to begin with, which results in Tony beating the brakes off of Ralphie. And he probably would have killed him too, if it wasn't for the intervention of Silvio and the rest of the gang. The irony of this situation is, despite Ralphie very obviously being in the wrong, by the rules of their organization, Tony is actually the one who's in the wrong, as Ralphie is a made man, which means that Tony isn't allowed to hit him.
He knew it was wrong what he did.
He is the boss. He can do what he wants.
Boss or no, you don't raise your hands to another made guy.
While Tony has far too much pride to apologize to Ralphie for hitting him, he's forced to make peace with Ralphie by giving him a promotion to captain. So basically, his punishment for killing the mother of his unborn child was a promotion. He does eventually get his comeuppance at the hands of Tony and his sausage fingers for setting their jointly owned racehorse on fire in order to collect the insurance money. I covered that situation and its consequences in my Every Tony Soprano Kill Ranked video. So check that out if you're interested in that. Honorable mention for the time that Ralphie got carried away doing a gladiator reenactment and ended up blinding Georgie. That's one of the stupidest scenes in the entire Soprano universe. Christopher does many despicable things. His overall abuse and mistreatment of Adriana were particularly unforgivable. So unsurprisingly, the worst thing he does on the show is betraying Adriana and allowing Tony to kill her after she reveals that she had been blackmailed into becoming an FBI informant and that they could enter the witness protection program if Christopher agrees to testify against Tony. Tony proved time and time again over the course of the show that he cared about Christopher about as much as the KKK care about black people. Yet when push came to shove, he still sided with his abusive uncle over the only person in the show who ever truly showed him love despite all his flaws. I cover this in way more detail in my video breaking down why long-term parking is one of the best episodes of The Sopranos. So if you want more detail, check that one out. Honorable mention for the time he got so high that he ended up sitting on Claudette. Another evil act I considered putting here was the time he shot the baker in the foot for taking too long to serve him his food. That was needlessly cruel. Oh, and you can't forget the time he threw a brick at an annoying waiter who was demanding a tip. Now that I think about it, Christopher doesn't really treat people in the food service industry too great. While Paulie has all the manners of a rabid pit bull, he's just so funny that it distracts you from just how evil he is. There's no better example of just how evil Paulie is than the time that he robs Min Matrone, an elderly lady who's a friend of his mother and who he's known his entire life. And while I understand that he's involved in organized crime, but there are crimes and then there are crimes. And stealing an old lady's life savings, that's just despicable. But he even goes one step further. When she catches him in the act and threatens to report him, he smothers her to death with a pillow. Honorable mention for just being a generally abusive uncle to Christopher, from sniffing Adriana's panties to messing with his lawn to stiffing him with the bill whenever possible. While I'm certain that Paulie rationalized it as harmless ball busting, no one else contributed more to Christopher's downfall other than perhaps Tony. While most Soprano fans might think that the most evil thing that Carmela did was have her emotional affair with Furia, I honestly think that she showed an impressive amount of restraint. She was clearly attracted to Furia and Furia was clearly attracted to her, yet she always went out of her way to ensure that nothing physical ever happened between them. She even uses AJ as a premeditated cockblock to guarantee that she doesn't end up playing hide the pickle with Furia. And sure, infidelity extends beyond mere penisary contact with her Volvo. It was definitely emotional cheating. But ask yourself this, would Tony have stopped there? Think about the Adriana situation. Did Tony show that much restraint? I think not. In my opinion, her much bigger crime was her hypocrisy, especially regarding Tony. For the most part, she looked down upon Tony from a moral perspective. She saw him as a criminal and often asked for him to reform his life or get back in the church. Despite this, she was one of the biggest beneficiaries from Tony's crime. So she was basically trying to have her cake and eat it too. Be the mob boss with the nice house and the nice car and the diamond rings, yet at the same time saying, oh, Tony, you should try to do better. The self-righteousness combined with the ability to look the other way when it benefits her is so jarring. Essentially, she's the worst kind of person. Someone who knows better, but doesn't do better. Honorable mention for the time that she told Tony that he was going to go to hell when he dies, right before he entered the MRI.
What's different between you and me is you're going to hell when you die.
Mind you, at the time, he thought he very well might have had a brain tumor. One hell of a wife. But despite what this might suggest, I actually think that for the most part, Carmela was a pretty supportive wife. Tony Soprano, the boss, the big cheese, the man that defines large and in charge. Over the show's 86 episode run, we see him commit countless acts that would definitely earn you a one-way ticket to hell. But of those hundreds of evil acts, one of them looms so much larger. And that is the murder of his son, Christopher. This is one of the few points in the show where I don't really think there's much of a debate to be had, though I'm sure some of you will try in the comments. Killing Christopher is the single most evil thing that Tony has ever done. Christopher's dad, Dickie, was a father figure for Tony, and after his untimely demise while Christopher was a baby, in order to return the favor, Tony became a father figure for Christopher. The show repeatedly frames their dynamic as that of a father and his son. So by killing him, he not only betrays both his father figure and his surrogate son, but he also repeats the cycle of suffering by condemning another child to a fate of growing up without a father, which the show demonstrates various times almost never ends well. I yap about this for over 10 minutes in the Christopher section of my every Tony Soprano Kill Explain video, so if you want a more detailed breakdown and analysis, feel free to check that one out. But long story short, Tony is a bad man. It's amazing that it took until season 6 for most Soprano fans to realize, I think this serial killer is irredeemable. When researching for this video, I ended up with a list of like at least 20 completely heinous things that Tony has done. So I'm definitely going to turn that into my next video. So if you think you'd like to see that, then subscribe and hit the bell so you're notified when I eventually get around to uploading that. As always, if you like the video, and the fact that your hair suggests that you like the video, unless you're sleeping, of course, in which case, sweet dreams. And like the video when you wake up. Most importantly, take care of yourself. In these somewhat uncertain times, kind of important that we focus on things that unite us, like stupid 20-year-old shows. But that's just this idiot's opinion.